back to Daily Bible with Chris. Glad that you're here for our follow-up to our previous daily Bible reading, which was in the book of Psalms, Psalms 26 through 30. So we've worked our way literally 1/5 of the way through the Bible, or 1/5 of the way through this book. Excuse me, getting a little ahead of myself there. But we've actually gone way past 1/5 of the Bible itself. But so glad that you are coming back here for our follow-up. So again, if you've not already read those 5 chapters, or you've not watched the previous video where we went through and read those 5 chapters, I would encourage you to do that first before watching this video. Again, we're just going to go through and just pull out some general themes and understandings from these chapters. It's a fairly short reading that we had, and we won't take very long with it, but just going to pull some of those thoughts out of there. So if you haven't already read it yourself or listened to it, I would encourage you to do that first. Also, if you've not subscribed to the channel, take a moment to do that and hit that like button. That would really appreciate that. I would appreciate that. Of course, we have 5 additional Psalms of David. We've yet to really come into any Psalms from anyone else yet, but they will come. But in Psalm 26, in this brief Psalm here, we have David writing out basically a plea of vindication from the Lord. In other words, of course, the Lord is the righteous judge. He's the only one that can really plead our case or determine our guilt or our innocence. And so he's appealing to heaven, appealing to the judge of heaven to vindicate him and he says, "Vindicate me, Lord," or "Clear my name, Lord," basically. Why? Because I've lived with integrity. I've trusted in you without wavering. Remember, he said, "I will not be shaken." Test me, Lord. Try me. Sometimes we need to do that. Say, "Lord, just put me to the test. Try me, and test me," because through that's how our faith grows. Examine my heart and my mind. In other words, search me. Another passage, he's going to say that, "Search me, O God, and see if there's anything sinful in my heart, in me, and create in me a pure heart, create in me a clean heart." So we see this often, David having this dialogue with God. So we see like the idea of a judge, but he's also using this term examine, just like what a doctor might examine a body, or a lawyer might examine a witness. All right, he's wanted to be gone over like a fine-tooth comb, to be tested, to be tried. Kind of the idea here, just as you would test the strength maybe of a metal or something like that, or you would try out something to make sure will hold up to the test of its purpose. That's what he's asking. Why? Because your mercy, your faithful love guides me. I live by your truth. What? The truth of the scriptures, at least of what David would have had at this time. And then we see this kind of almost, I feel like, a parallel back to Psalm 1, where he said, not to sit in the seat of the scornful, not to walk with sinners, not to those, the sinners, the wicked and such, don't be with them. The blessed man doesn't do any of that stuff. His delight is in the Lord. He says, I don't sit with the worthless or associate with hypocrites. I hate the crowd of evildoers. I do not sit with the wicked. What does he do? I wash my hands in innocence and go around your altar. There again, that's that description of clean hands. Who can come into the presence of the Lord? One with clean hands and a pure heart. I raise my voice in thanksgiving. I tell about your wondrous works. In other words, he's a witness for who God is and what God has done in his life, as we are to be Christ's witnesses. David was a witness of the mighty power of God. And then we see this description of his desire to be in God's house. I think if David could have spent his time completely all the time in God's house, he would have been happy. I think in some ways, David probably would have rather been a priest or a musician in the tabernacle versus being king. But that was not God's plan for him. God's plan was for him to be a king, but he was very musically inclined. And that's the other thing you need to keep in mind when we're reading through these Psalms, especially the ones written by David. He's an artist. He's a musician. He speaks in this very colorful, beautiful language, and his descriptions of God and such he uses things that we can see or things that we can imagine to describe what in many ways is indescribable. But he says, I love the house where you dwell, the place where your glory resides. Don't destroy me like you destroy the evil. And he's like, I love your house. I love another passage in Psalms. He says, I was happy when they said, let us go into the house of the Lord. It wasn't a drudgery for him to go to the tabernacle or to go to the Lord's house, because he enjoyed it, because he knew he was in the presence of God and he liked being in God's presence. Especially when he was walking without, blameless before the Lord. Now, obviously, there's times when he's going to fall and he's going to sin. And I'm sure the presence of God wasn't that cheerful of a thing then, because when we have that barrier of sin between us and God, it causes that relationship to be broken. And that's the time when maybe we don't want to go to church. We don't want to open the Bible. We don't want to pray. We don't want to be around God's people because it's convicting to us and such. But at this point, he says, I'm full of integrity. Redeem me. Be gracious to me. My foot stands on level ground. I will bless the Lord in the assemblies. In other words, in front of everybody, I'm going to get up. David's one to get up. I'm going to sing with all my heart. And then chapter 27, a very famous, very quotable, especially during times of war in the past, very quotable passage of scripture. But he says, the Lord is my light and my salvation. It's one of the only times in the Old Testament where God is directly referred to as a light. Certainly we see his attributes of light. Of course, he was the pillar of fire by night, so he provided light direction for the children of Israel. Certainly, he was there at creation. He created the light. And certainly there's other examples. There's talking about, Isaiah talks about the Messiah who's going to come will be the light and salvation. We see the same description to God here. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom should I fear? The Lord is the stronghold or the fortress of my life. Whom should I dread? He's kind of this repetitious thing, like who should I fear? Why should I be afraid? Because he's my light in the dark world. He's the one who will save me, and he's the one that will defend me against all enemies. When evildoers come against me to devour my flesh, enemies and such, they stumble and fell. Why? Because of God's power, right? Though an army deploys against me, my heart will not be afraid. Why? Because God is fighting the battle for him. He knows that God is the Lord of all armies, and he will fight for him. Perhaps when he makes this comment about to destroy my flesh, he might have been referencing back to his battle with Goliath. What did Goliath say he was going to do? He was going to kill David and give his flesh to the birds. Obviously, God allowed David to defeat Goliath. The Philistines were defeated. He says, though a war breaks out against me, that's where that passage, though a war breaks out against me, I will still be confident. Why? Because God is on my side. And why? Because God had given the promise that if you followed his ways, if you were obedient to him, God would bless David, God would bless the people of Israel. Where the children of Israel get into trouble is after David, after Solomon, when they begin to do it their way, want to do what was right in their eyes, then God was not always with them. And then he says, I've asked one thing from the Lord. Now, I like this here. There's these actions here. He says, I've asked one thing from the Lord. It's what I desire, to dwell all the days of my life, gazing on the beauty of the Lord, seeking him in his temple. So it's one thing, but it's in different parts, So I desire to dwell. I want to gaze on the beauty of the Lord, and I want to seek him in his temple. For he will conceal me in his shelter on the day of adversity. He will hide me under the cover of his tent. He will set me high on the rock. In other words, he's going to take care of him against his enemy. He's going to hide him in his tabernacle, and he will even set him up on the high place, of course, the high ground of the rock. Then my head will be high above my enemies. I will offer sacrifices in his tent, in the tabernacle, with shouts of joy. I will sing and make music to the Lord. There's the musician. There's David, the psalmist, kicking in with all his musical gifts. And then he's going to say, Lord, hear me when I call. Be gracious to me. My heart says this about you. Seek his face. Lord, I will seek your face. And then he says, don't hide your face from me. In other words, I'm seeking after you. Don't make it difficult for me to find you. Let me seek you. You've been my helper. Don't leave me or abandon me. I'm dependent upon you, God of my salvation. Again, referencing back to that first verse there. And then he's going to say, even if my father, my mother, even if I'm orphaned, even if my father and mother abandon me, I know that you care about me. We know too that in the New Testament it talks about when though if your father and mother abandon you, the Lord will take you up, and he will be like a father to his children. Show me your way, Lord. Lead me on a level path. He already said he was going to be on a level place because of God. Do not give me over to my foes, false witnesses rising up against me, breathing violence. I am certain that I will see the Lord's goodness in the land of the living. Obviously, earlier he had said that the Lord's goodness and mercy follow him all the days of his life. And then he's going to say, wait for the Lord, be strong and let your heart be courageous. Repetitious here, wait for the Lord. Oftentimes we'll see David repeat a phrase or repeat a thought when he really wants to drive that home. He says, wait for the Lord. Where is he waiting for the Lord? Probably in the Lord's tabernacle or in the Lord's temple. Well, not the temple, but the tabernacle, the place of God's presence. He's waiting on him. And he's going to be strong because he's in God's presence. And let your heart be courageous. Very similar to the passage that we know that Joshua is said about in the book of Joshua. Be strong and courageous. Why? Because the Lord is with you. David is strong and courageous because the Lord is with him. And then chapter 28, again, we have The Lord, David calling upon the Lord to be his strength. Lord, I call to you my rock. Again, over and over again, he's going to refer to these kind of inanimate objects describing God's presence or his purpose in David's life. The rock being this strong place of strength. Do not be deaf to me. In other words, don't not hear what I'm saying. If you remain silent to me, I'll be like those who go down to the pit or those who go down to the grave. Listen to my pleading when I cry for your help. Okay, this isn't just Lord help me. This is crying, wailing, begging God's intercession. I'm going to lift up my hands to you in your holy sanctuary, which was a common practice back then, and we see it even today. So when you see somebody lifting up hands, as long as they're not trying to do it to draw attention to themselves, that's a totally biblical way to respond to the Lord. But what kind of hands do we lift up? We have to lift up clean hands. How do we have clean hands? We have to be right with God. And then he's going to say again, don't drag me away with the evil, the wicked, those who speak friendly, but they have malice in their hearts. In other words, the hypocrites, the ones that are tricking you with their words. Repay them, those false and evildoers, repay them for what they've done. Repay them according to their work. In other words, let them reap what they have sown, because they don't consider what the Lord has done or the work of his hands. He will tear them down and not rebuild them. And then he's going to say, blessed is the Lord. He's heard my son. So we have this, Lord, I call to you. Don't ignore me. Please hear me. Please respond. And then we have the kind of the answer there. Blessed be the Lord. He has heard the sound of my pleading. The Lord is my strength, my shield. My heart trusts in him and I am helped. Again, there's that idea. He's my strength when I'm weak, and he's my shield, the one that protects me from the enemy's arrows. My heart celebrates. I give thanks to him. How? With my song. That's why music is such an important part of the Christian's response to the Lord, the Christian's worship of the Lord. Can we worship the Lord without song? Certainly. But it is part of what we're supposed to do. And we see that both in the Old Testament and the New Testament as well. And so even if you can't sing and even if you can't play an instrument, just make a joyful noise to the Lord. We're going to get to that verse eventually in this reading through Psalm. It's in there for those who are not. I guess I'm attracted to these references to music because I am a singer. I do sing. I don't play an instrument very well, so right here's my instrument, but I enjoy giving back as God has blessed me in song to him. And so, but even if you don't consider yourself a singer, that's okay. Give yourself over to him through music. For him, he desires to hear from you, and he loves to hear the songs of his redeemed. The Lord is the strength of his people. So not only is the Lord the strength of David, we see in verse 8, he's the strength of all of his people. He's their stronghold of salvation for his anointed. And then we have the Savior people, bless your possession, shepherd them and carry them forever. There's the shepherd king David, going back and referencing God as our shepherd again. Jesus, the good shepherd, what does he do? He takes care of his sheep. We are the sheep. And he takes care of us. And here, I love this. He carries them forever, not just driving them. And sometimes the shepherd has to carry us through difficult times. And then chapter 29, we see this description of the Lord and specifically the Lord's voice. But at the beginning, it says, ascribe or give to the Lord, you heavenly beings. This is probably a reference to angelic beings, angels. Give to the Lord glory and strength. Give him the glory that's due his name. Worship the Lord in the splendor of his holiness. In other words, it's not just for earthly beings to give worship to him, but also the heavenly beings and the angels. And we know that the angels, the cherubim that are around the throne of God, even as I'm saying this and speaking this, they are worshiping around the throne of God. They are joining with all of creation, basically sings a song of worship and praise to the Lord. And then we have this description of the Lord's voice. The voice of the Lord is above the waters. We can't even reference back to at the beginning of creation. It talks about how the Lord hovered above the waters before creation, above the firmament. So it may be what he's referencing here, but he says the God of glory thunders. So his voice is like thunder. It's the voice of the Lord is in power and splendor. It breaks the cedars of Lebanon is what it's talking about. The best wood, famous wood in the world. Even that is not strong enough to hold up to the Lord's voice. He shatters those cedars of Lebanon. He makes Lebanon skip like a calf and Syrian like a young wild ox. The voice of the Lord flashes flames of fire. It shakes the wilderness, even the wilderness of Kadesh. The voice of the Lord makes the deer give birth and strips the woodlands bare. That's the power of God's voice. And we know one day Jesus is going to speak with his words, and the enemies of Satan at the Battle of Armageddon will be defeated. Why? From his very mouth. That's how much power comes. And we know, right, the very voice of creation, that's the power he demonstrated. What did he say? Let there be light. Boom, and there was light. He spoke the very world that we live in, the universe and the galaxies and beyond, all of that, he spoke into existence. That's the power of God's voice. I think that's again why maybe there's a description there about his voice being above the waters, maybe a point back to Genesis. And so in his temple, all cry glory. We give glory to him. And look at this. The Lord sits enthroned over the flood. This flood he's talking about is not just general waters, but it is a direct description back to the Noah's flood as well. He was the one who sat in judgment during the time of the flood. He is the king forever enthroned. He gives his people strength. The Lord blesses his people with peace. When God is allowed to reign in righteousness and justice, he brings peace to his people. And then finally, chapter 30, another very famous chapter as well. We see David, and it says this particular psalm was written and given as a dedication song for the palace of David. So when David's palace was completed, this song was sung at that dedication. It may have been used in other places as well, maybe during the time of the temple after David, but we definitely know it was during the time of David's house being built. And it started, I will exalt you, Lord, because you have lifted me up. You've not allowed my enemies to triumph over me. In other words, I'm king. I'm in play. I now have my physical house established. Lord, my God, I cried to you for help and you healed me. You brought me up out of Sheol. You brought me up from the very depths of the grave. You spared me from going down to the pit. Sing to the Lord, you his faithful ones, and praise his holy name. So this is kind of that little refrain there. Sing to the Lord. You're singing what you've sung. Praise his name. His anger lasts only a moment, but his favor is for a lifetime. In other words, God does get angry, and he's angry at the things that the wicked do every day, right? And when we sin, he's angry with our sin, but it lasts for just a moment. If we confess and ask for forgiveness, he's faithful and just to forgive us, to cleanse us. Weeping may stay you ever had those nights where you just cried all night long, you're going through so much agony, or maybe it's conviction or whatever it might be, or pain or whatever you're going through. But when the morning comes, when the dawn comes in, it reminds you there's a new day. There's joy that comes in the morning. And he refers to the fact, again, he will not be shaken. He's secure in the Lord. You showed me favor. You made me stand like a strong mountain. In other words, sometimes we don't feel very sure about ourselves, but when we have the Lord on our side, we can stand confident that he's going to work his will and way. But when you hid your face from me, Lord, there's times when I didn't know where you were, didn't know how you were working. I was terrified. I called to you. And then I asked you to listen and be gracious to me. Lord, be my helper. And then from that, you took my lament, my crying, you turned it into dancing, right? My weeping became dancing. You removed my sackcloth. That idea of grieving, of deep humility we've read about before. They would literally put sackcloth, take their fine clothes off, put the cheapest burlap sack on, pour ash and dirt over their heads, and humble themselves before the Lord. And during that time when I did that, you answered me. You brought joy to me. So you took my lament, my cry turned to dancing. You took off my sackcloth and clothed me with gladness, so that I can sing to you and not be silent. Lord, my God, I will praise you forever. When we come through the dark night of the soul, we come through those difficult times of pain and suffering and grief and tears and such. We come through that, and when God brings us through and we get to the other side of that process, there's just joy to be had in it. And we can even have joy in the midst of the storm. We can have joy in the midst of our suffering. Doesn't mean we run around putting on a fake laugh and fake smile, whatever. We can still be grieving. But joy, the joy of the Lord is our strength, because we trust him. We don't lose our confidence in him. We trust him in spite of the fact that the circumstances of life may be knocking us around. We know that ultimately God is going to bring us through. And so we trust in him, we wait upon him, and that's where our strength is renewed. And when we do that, from that blessing, from that gratefulness and gratitude, overflows the desire to sing and to bless the name of the Lord. And I just pray today, maybe you take a moment to sing to the Lord, sing to him a song of praise, of gratitude, of thanksgiving. Let it just come. Maybe it's just a psalm. Maybe you just take some of these words and you sing it, come up with a melody. Or maybe you let the Lord bring up something new. The Lord desires a new song. We should be singing new songs to the Lord, for he's always doing something new. We look back what he's done. We also look ahead to what he will do in the future. Hope that was encouraging to you and helpful to you a little bit as we go through these Psalms. Again, some of these themes are pretty repetitious throughout, but that's okay. We need repetition. We need to be reminded, because we so easily, I do, forget sometimes these principles of the Lord, and we get off track and we let our mind get in a place it shouldn't be. we need to keep our eyes focused on him and depend upon him to help us in the times of trouble. So God bless you. We'll be back for our daily Bible reading, and we'll be in Psalm chapter 31. See you then.